Hey guys, what is happening? Metal Viking here, and welcome back to another video here on my second channel. And for today's video, I am going to be ranking all of the albums from legendary Swedish melodic death metal band In Flames. I'm going to be ranking all of their albums in their entire discography. And the inspiration behind this video is because my co-host over on my podcast, which you can watch on the main channel, by the way, make sure you go and subscribe and check the content out over there. My co-host, he and I have a shared love for this band. This band was hugely influential for both of us in terms of, our taste in music, and when it comes to his side of, creative endeavors, when it comes to making his own music, they influenced him a bunch. And then, of course, for me, more so in the sense of like visual art and just general music taste going forward, particularly within the genre of metal music. Hugely influential band when it comes to the metal scene in general, and their contribution cannot be denied whether you love or hate them. So, I'm going to be ranking all their albums today. This one's for you, Fudnam. So, guys, before we go any further with the video, I'd like to encourage you all to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like on the video, share, comment, all that cool stuff. Really helps in boosting the video with the algorithm and the growth of the channel. Also, make sure you follow me on all my various social media platforms. Check out the Patreon. And with all that out of the way, let us get on with the video. So I guess we're going to start at the very beginning of their discography. We'll start from oldest to newest, and then I'm going to try and not go into overly descriptive detail. Otherwise, we'll be here all day when it comes to ranking this, but I'm just going to try and surmise my thoughts and reasoning as to why I have ranked them the way I have ranked them. So, let's start with the first album. So, their very first album, Lunar Strain. And now, this was their first album that they put out with if you want to call it the original lineup. But however, when I say the original lineup, I don't mean the lineup that everyone came to know them as during like the peak of their career and where they were building the foundation and getting started. This was just like, original members in the sense of like who joined on the project for this album before they eventually departed. On this record, two of the mainstay members who are kind of like synonymous with In Flames as their branding and everything like that going forward after this is Bjorn and Anders, and neither of them were in the band at this point. At this point, it was I can't remember the vocalist's name, but the vocalist of Dark Tranquility was the vocalist on this record. Jesper Stromblad, the guy who founded the band, is one of the initial founding members of the band and was the brains behind a lot of their songwriting and melodic elements. He was on drums on this record, he wasn't on guitars. So this album, I personally don't enjoy it. One of the reasons being not because it's, it didn't have any impact or influence or anything like that. It's just, it feels a little too experimental. It's very different from what the band would later come to be known for. There were a few subtle elements here and there that would become In Flames' early discography, but overall still very avant-garde, very out there, very experimental, so definitely not one of my favorites of theirs. So this album belongs in D tier. It's not a particularly memorable album for me, despite the great vocal performance. It's just, it's a little bit down on the list, so definitely not their best record. Then we get to their second record, The Jester Race. This is when Bjorn and Anders joined the band, and when Jesper actually started playing guitar and doing more guitar parts and everything. So this was basically the album where the band, as everyone knew the lineup to be, the quote-unquote original lineup, started and would be synonymous with the band right up until 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. before Jesper left the band. So and then subsequently other members would leave as well, leaving Anders and Bjorn being the only two consistent members at this stage in the band's history. So yeah, so second album, Jester Race. I know a lot of old heads really love this album and everything like that, but to me this album still feels like predominantly a jam session. Not too many memorable or iconic songs on here. Like, that's not to say there aren't any, there are one or two, but it's compared to their later works, definitely not their best work, but it was a step in evolution and in the right direction. So it's definitely better than Lunar Strain. I would definitely put it up there in C tier. Because if you had to put it on, I don't know, in the car or something, I won't get angry. And I mean, it's In Flames, it's not going to be bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just not my favorite record of theirs. It's a pretty okay album, I'd say. Then we move on to their third record, which came out, I think, a year later or something like that, and that's Horacle. Again, Horacle, just like with Jester Race, not too many iconic or memorable songs on here. There are one or two, don't get me wrong, but the thing that I find funny about this album is that not so much any of the metal tracks I find to be particularly memorable. The title track, Horacle, which is basically just a traditional Swedish folk music kind of track, and is very short, is only just over 2 minutes in length, is actually the most memorable track for me, and is one I still frequently will go back and listen to again and again, and even add on playlists for when I want to listen to music that's a little bit more on the ambient or something like that kind of space. This particular track is the only memorable one for me. Everything else is like, there are some iconic riffs and stuff from some of other tracks here and there on this record, but just overall doesn't quite land the mark. So I'd say the band was still trying to find their sound, find everything that made them the band that they would later become. So still a step in the right direction. I would say still a tad better than the Jester Race, but not nearly enough to put it in B tier. So it still belongs in C tier along with the Jester Race. Then we get on to the band's fourth studio album, one of their most iconic ones, and where they finally started to find, their footing and what sort of made them become a huge breakout success in the Gothenburg scene, and define the Gothenburg sound along with, bands like At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, and many others. That album is none other than Colony. And with Colony, I'm going to put it in B tier. I know that might be blasphemous for some of the old heads and the old guard, but for me it's like, it's a great album. It's a fantastic album. It's a huge step up in production and songwriting and everything like that compared to the previous three records, and is definitely a success story for the album, not for the album, for the band. Sorry, my apologies, but it still doesn't, for me at least, me personally, doesn't meet my expectations and what I loved about melodic death metal overall. So it's not quite up there in A tier, but compared to the previous three records, this album is geniusly done. It's well put together. It's expertly crafted, and you could definitely tell Jesper was already finding that perfect formula that In Flames would later come to be known for, and that the metal core genre as a whole would take and run with, and incorporate the more hardcore side of punk and metal into the genre and everything, but use a lot of the tropes that they established and founded. But yeah, Colony, it's a great album, fantastic album overall, but still not the best in terms of their older discography. So yeah, I know, again, blasphemy to the old heads, but that's just how I feel about it. Then we get onto what is, depending on who you talk to among In Flames fans, what is either considered their last great album, or, in my opinion, is the beginnings of just the beginning of their career and the start of something great. So that album is none other than Clayman. Clayman belongs in A tier because it is just one of the most iconic melodic death metal records. That is perfection itself when it comes to the typical melodic death metal formula that a lot of other bands in the genre kind of established and then never changed or experimented with or anything like that as their careers progressed from the 90s towards today. You know, In Flames is one of the few bands in this style that actually continued to evolve and not just change their sound, but experiment with the formula and add some new elements to the songwriting and everything as they went along. So they, even though they sound nothing like they did here, or in even during my favorite era of their music history, even though they sound nothing like that anymore, at least you can give them props for at least trying to breathe new life and reinvigorate the melodic death metal genre, as opposed to some other bands which there's no harm if you find something that works, you stick with it and you release albums consistently. Bands like Sabaton do this, which is great and all, but sometimes in the case of melodic death metal, it definitely needs some evolution to it, because it isn't one of those genres you can necessarily keep in one place and hope for it to continue thriving and taking strides. So this album, as I said, was the beginning of greater things, and would lay the foundation for what is my favorite era of the band. It's a fantastic album overall. Got some of the best tracks and singles, tracks like Bullet Ride, Pinball Map, Only for the Weak, Raisin, a whole bunch of others. Just a brilliant record, fantastic record overall, one of my all-time favorites. And it is definitely worthy of the hype it still gets to this day, the praise, and just a very impactful and influential album, one of the best that there is, and the peak of In Flames' early discography. Now we get to the album where some In Flames fans might consider the record where they quote-unquote sold out, and went to mainstream, even though this is actually not where In Flames went mainstream at all. But this particular album was a huge change for the band, and it was this already gave us an idea of what they were going to be like throughout the rest of the 2000s, leading up to Jesper's departure after their album A Sense of Purpose. And this record also pretty much started giving us hints, because mind you, nu metal was big at the time. Metalcore was still pretty underground and not quite there yet, so we're figuring out what it wanted to be. But this particular record and its subsequent two follow-up albums would then go on to establish the kind of thing that we'd expect from metalcore bands like Killswitch Engage and many others going forward, with how the songs are structured and the whole harsh vocals meets clean vocals kind of thing. So this album was definitely the start of that, and also along with its electronic elements would breathe life to genres like trance metal, which originated in Japan. So that album is none other than Reroutes to Remain. I personally think it's a great album. There's not a single bad track on this record. However, I won't put it in S tier. I think it's still, like, there are, even though there's not a single bad track on here, there's still some elements of it, like in terms of the mixing, where sometimes the drums sound a little bit too soft and everything, and Jesper's solos or sometimes feel a bit too soft in the mix and are a little bit drowned out at times. And of course, Under's vocals, still need some work, I'd say, from time to time. It's not to say I ever hated them in this era or any thing like that. But I mean, there were just some elements of it where it's like, because of how it was mixed and everything, could still use some work and everything. So those elements keep it from being an S tier album. But overall, it's still a fantastic record. All the songs are written well. They're all very memorable, very catchy, got great hooks, a lot of nice solos, great synth samples, and a great utilization of them, nice atmosphere. So yeah, great record overall. But could be a little bit better in terms of some aspects, but great album overall. Absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend people check it out. Then we get to the album that I consider to be my absolute favorite of In Flames records of all time. Now, at the time when the album came out, it got even worse reviews than Reroutes to Remain did. A lot of people to this day still, skip this album, look over it, and people who still have a hate boner for it like to think it's a nu metal album, even though there's absolutely no elements of nu metal in it. There's no hip hop samples, there's no guest features with rappers. There's no Linkin Park and Limp Bizkit things. There's no Korn elements. There's nothing like that. Sure, this record has got some tracks that are of a lot more chuggy, but I would feel that a lot of them fall more into like a more groove metal kind of side of things, and not just groove metal, even some elements that you'd come to hear in early metalcore too. But I think the main aspect of this album that is the best part about it is how it is by far In Flames the most atmospheric record. It uses a lot, and I mean a lot of keyboards and synth samples and everything like that to create this very how would you call it, like to describe the atmosphere, it's like a mixture of being like cold but tranquil, and just esoteric in a way. It's a very and even haunting at times. It's just it's just an overall great album, and it was something that was definitely a one-off. The band have never tried replicating or doing anything like this since then. And I should also mention that it is also the last time in the entire discography of the band that we would still hear that iconic Gothenburg sound, in terms of like what the sound that you would hear from other melodic death metal bands, even bands that don't originate from Sweden and Gothenburg, bands like Omnium Gatherum or anything like that. This is the last time we would ever hear that production style on an In Flames record, and I'd say even though they weren't writing songs in the style of Reroutes to Remain or the follow-up album Come Clarity in this production style, I'd say the production style definitely aids in keeping this album from having, as you would call it, nu metal sound. It's like I said, I still think it falls more under groove metal and subtle elements of metalcore. But it's definitely got some chuggy moments and everything like that. There aren't as many solos as what there are on previous albums and other albums going forward, but tracks like Evil in a Closet and a bunch of others still have guitar solos, and it's not like Jesper's melodic work is chucked out the window. If anything, it's enhanced with this album. So yeah, this album gets too much hate, is not deserving of it, and more people need to listen to it, and it is definitely one of In Flames' most ballsy albums out there, and that's what makes it an S tier for me. So yeah, it's I say it with full confidence, this album is actually better than half the ones that people like to dick ride into oblivion and say, oh, this was the last time In Flames were good. This is my personal favorite record of theirs, and it's unfortunate we'll never hear or see anything like it again, not just from In Flames themselves, but from any other band in this genre and style. But it is what it is, and I'm glad it exists, and I'm happy that it actually came to be. Then we move on to their next album, Come Clarity, which is the album that really got them the success that they have today. If Soundtrack to Your Escape was kind of like their big breakthrough into the US Billboard charts and everything like that, that's not to say their previous albums didn't make it into American metalheads' ears and everything like that, but if Soundtrack to Your Escape was the one that kind of like made American metalheads and other international countries, pay more attention to them and be like, ooh, what is this Swedish melodic death metal sound, and everything like that, then Come Clarity was like the one where everyone was like, whoa, we really need to be paying attention to this kind of thing, more so than what we have in the past. So Come Clarity was a fantastic record. I will say it's still got a bit of an... I try to be understanding of production styles with albums, because even though I'm not a music producer myself, but I am friends with plenty of people who are music producers or have shown me a few things on how music production works. Even though I try to be as a more of a listener of music, even though I try to be more understanding and forgiving of why certain albums have certain mixes and go in the direction that they go in, and why they sound the way that they do, as opposed to how a person who's a producer will do it, who will straight up say, oh, this is mixed up like shit, oh, it's a horrible album because this, and I don't know why music listeners enjoy this kind of thing. While I try to be a bit more understanding of it, I do kind of agree that I think this record could have sounded a lot better and stayed and it could have sounded a lot better and would have been a lot more how should we say, more polished if they just stuck with the normal Gothenburg sound that they had on their previous albums, especially on an album like a Soundtrack to Your Escape, because this album is also pretty atmospheric in many ways, in more ways than one. But on this record, they went for a more raw, you could say almost borderline black metal style of recording, which is not a bad thing. I know a lot of people like to think black metal is a shitty genre with shitty mixing and everything like that. Believe it or not, guys, lo-fi has its advantages in creating atmosphere and stuff. It doesn't, just because something's lo-fi or recorded raw doesn't mean it's shit. It's all about songwriting and how you manage that lo-fi soundscape and everything. But even though they went for a more raw sound with this one, it's not to say it's bad or anything like that. That's my only critique of it. But overall, it's probably one of their best records. It's got some of their best, most iconic songs, and it is the album that most people, even people who don't necessarily listen to metal religiously, but have heard of In Flames, they know that this is what this band's songs are generally sound like, because the first track, Take This Life, was one of the most popular songs to be played on Guitar Hero. And mind you, Guitar Hero was one of the biggest video game franchises during this time, during the 2000s, and actually aided in the growth of a lot of these bands. And this particular album with the song Take This Life was the one that did that. So yeah, and then of course there's a whole bunch of other iconic tracks like Dead End, Scream, Leeches, Crawl Through Knives. There's a whole bunch of other fantastic tracks on here. So it's definitely one of their great albums of all time, and I'd say along with Soundtrack to Your Escape, despite my criticism of the mixing, it belongs up there because the impact of this album cannot be denied. It is absolutely one of their best, and again, depending on who you talk to, for fans of this era of In Flames, this is probably what they consider to be the last good album that they put out. Just like for the earlier stuff, people think that Clayman was the last one, the great one they put out. So you can definitely see how the band's evolution have continued to not just divide the old fans, but has also kind of just brought in waves of new fans, until they do something else again that will eventually divide people again. But it's still an interesting evolution, to say the least. Then we get to the album that was my first exposure to In Flames. So essentially, my first exposure to In Flames was essentially, I used to collect comic books back in the day. I had a World of Warcraft comic, several of them actually, and for at least 3 or so issues, they kept advertising this tour by the metalcore band All That Remains. They were doing some big tour to promote their new album, and the bands that were opening for them at the time were Trivium, 36 Crazy Fists, and then of course In Flames. And now of course In Flames had just got this new logo, and a lot of the bands I'd been listening to up to that point, both metalcore and nu metal kind of stuff, I'd never seen any of them have like a logo quite like this before. Like I was too used to the more like polished, clean, straight, like very neat edges, kind of stuff, metal logos and everything like that, and then I see this thing that looks like almost like scribbles, which normally subconsciously you think to yourself, oh, they must be heavier or more brutal than some of these bands, or something about the design just hooks you in, and you're like, oh, this must be cool. And then I think about a few days after reading those comics, I remember, because this was around 2010, I believe, I think on the local radio station here, the only metal one that we had, which is unfortunately no longer around, but the only metal station, Tux FM, aka the University of Pretoria, because I live in South Africa, a radio station, they only used to play rock and metal, and then they had a late night show called Metal Militia, and in the Metal Militia they would play the best metal songs of that year or of the week, everything like that. And the top song was In Flames' collaboration with Pendulum from their then recent album Immersion, and that was of course the track Self versus Self, with of course In Flames. And I was like, oh, this sounds great, and sounds really cool. I wonder what In Flames' other stuff sounds like. Now, at the time, I mistook Pendulum's vocalist for being the vocalist of In Flames, so I thought they were the In Flames, and Pendulum were the screaming guys and everything like that. But of course, when I eventually discovered this album, found out that did not be the case. But either way, I wasn't disappointed in the slightest, because when I first saw the album art for A Sense of Purpose, I was hooked on it. I was drawn to it, and I just loved the mishmash of the blues and greens and everything else, and the unique art style that looked really cool. So I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This looks like something I might enjoy. And the very first track I listened to off of the record was a song called, I think it's the third track on the album, Sleepless Again. And it turned out to be one of my all-time favorites. Like, I was just so sold on that song. I was hooked on it. I couldn't stop listening to it for weeks, if not months on end. And it just prompted me to get the rest of the album, which I subsequently did. And it was my very first In Flames album. Now, whether some of you listening to this or watching this, whether you think that's a good thing or not, is entirely subjective and up to you. But for me personally, I couldn't think of a better way to get into In Flames. The album was a perfect mix of being heavier than some of the stuff I was already listening to at the time, while also at the same time being kind of soft and accessible to not kind of deter me from exploring the melodic death metal genre as a whole. And, some people might say this is where In Flames went full on groove metal / arena / radio rock, but I'd say with Jesper still being involved in this project, there were still plenty of elements that kept it being melodic death metal, with tracks like The Mirror's Truth, Disconnected, March to the Shore, a whole bunch of these others. It's a pretty nice, solid album overall, one of my all-time favorites, and I still listen to it a lot to this day. So this album also belongs in S tier. Again, it's just like with Soundtrack to Your Escape, it's a very much glossed over, looked over record in the band's history and everything like that, which is unfortunate. But I'd say these three are I'd say this is like their holy trinity of albums. This is where you could say that melodic death metal, modern melodic death metal formula, it had been perfected. In Flames have established everything, and now they were ready to move on to their next phase, which I do share with most old school In Flames fans. This is the part where I do agree with most of you. The new stuff isn't that great. It's actually not that good. I don't hate it, but I don't love it, and it's definitely not even average. Most of it, a lot of it is just it's there, it exists, whether I like it or not. However, I will briefly talk about one album among this new era that I just absolutely despise because of just how horrible it is, and how what a letdown it was, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So now, after A Sense of Purpose and Jesper left, this signaled the beginning of the end for the band in many ways, in terms of what they'd established and what came before. So they announced this new album, Sounds of a Playground Fading, to which the first single that came out, Deliver Us, I really did enjoy. But then, every other single I was like, this is not doing it for me. And the only other track that wasn't a single, but I'm glad they actually didn't release it as a single, I'm glad they kind of kept it as like a hidden surprise for the track, is Fear is the Weakness. And yeah, that Fear is the Weakness, out of all the tracks on Sounds of a Playground Fading, is the only track to sound like something that Jesper would have written without Jesper being there, and also sounded like something that might have been a bonus track, if anything, on A Sense of Purpose. So yeah, Sounds of a Playground Fading, not their worst album yet, but it's definitely pretty mid. So I'd put it in C tier, and especially since there are only 2 really good tracks on there, everything else is kind of forgettable. Even now, talking to you guys, I don't remember half the other songs at all on here. So yeah, just kind of unfortunate. Cool album art though. I actually have a t-shirt because metal merch is hard to come by here in South Africa. I do have a Sounds of a Playground Fading t-shirt, which is cool. It's cool to have the crow on the t-shirt and everything, but other than that, yeah, it's just a bit of a shame. Then we get into the band's next album, which, holy shit, was the biggest disappointment for me. None of the songs are good. They are all absolutely terrible. And the main reason being is because they'll start off good for the most part. They'll start off good. They'll feel like they're going somewhere. And then when those choruses hit, it's just so underwhelming. And then oftentimes you'll maybe hear one good first chorus, and then the rest of it, as the choruses progress and everything like that, they become more and more directionless and underwhelming as you go on. And just overall, with that in mind, the songs just aren't good and they're not memorable at all. They just this is probably the most pop rock you're gonna get, and not even like good pop rock, because it's not like listening to pop punk or anything like that, where it's like, yeah, it's radio pop rock music, but it's still fun and nice to listen to. Like, no, this is like, you're like, huh, what? This is the kind of stuff that you'd expect people who eat and drink at Starbucks and shop at thrift shops to listen to, kind of metal or pop rock stuff. So yeah, this is one of the worst In Flames albums ever. And like, cool album art, but no amount of cool album art can save an album, especially a bad album. So the worst In Flames record of all time, I would argue it's probably worse than Lunar Strain. But yeah, it's just a bad record, and like, again, no hates towards Unders and any of them. I'm sure they worked hard on it and are proud of it. But for me personally, it's a no-go. I can't revisit this album without it feeling like a chore to listen to and everything. So yeah, definitely give that one a skip. Then we get to their follow-up album, Battles, which, you know, when the first singles like The End and everything came out, I thought like, oh, maybe they are returning to A Sense of Purpose era. You know, we're finally going to get some of that melodic death metal elements, along with the more groove metal and sometimes arena rock kind of aspects here and there. I thought we were going to finally get some of that again. But no, once again, the singles were misleading. And everything else was just bland and forgettable. And, you know, they fooled me again with the cool album art and bringing back the scribbly logo. Because as you can see with Siren Charms, it's just a pretty plain text thing. Which, sure, they did do with, you know, with Reroutes to Remain, Soundtrack to Your Escape, and Come Clarity. They did have a pretty plain and simple logo. But, you know, sometimes, I guess in the case with their newer stuff, you know, if you see a plain logo, watch out, guys, they're about to do something divisive again. So, but yeah, Battles, well, it's definitely better than Siren Charms. Again, not particularly great album, like only 1, maybe 2 tops memorable tracks, but even then, those tracks are a bit average compared to what they're capable of doing. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame that once again they will continue with this trend. So yeah, a little unfortunate, but it is what it is. Then we get to the 2019 album, I the Mask. Now, I should preface this. So I've always loved Under's vocals, but I will admit he's not the best vocalist, you know, when it comes to metal vocals. You know, his singing voice is kind of like even though In Flames are popular, you know, his vocals, his singing voice is a bit of an acquired taste. As for his screams, they fit the tone of the music and everything like that, but you can still tell he doesn't really have a technique, and that he's kind of like forcing himself to make these screams, which I'm surprised didn't damage his vocal cords or anything like that as the years went on. But it's but it fits with the music, and that was, as long as the Jesper, when Jesper was still in the band, or even now with the newer band members, as long as they could write something that could match Anders' vocal style, that's part of the secret ingredient to the success of a band is that, like, people will put so much emphasis on the vocalist, but a vocalist is only as good as the songwriters and the other band members in there. Just to use a more recent example, let's take CJ McCreery, who used to be in Lorna Shore, was one of the former vocalists of Lorna Shore. His new project, Immortal Disfigurements, like, don't get me wrong, it sounds good overall, but like compared to the songwriting from his old band Signs of the Swarm and that one album he was in Lorna Shore with, compared to the songwriting in those two, Immortal Disfigurements just kind of sounds like pretty bland, and the only highlight element of the music is the crazy stuff CJ could do with his vocals, but the actual songs themselves aren't particularly memorable. So but that being said, Anders at this point, I think between Battles, or already at the time Battles came out, up until this album, Anders went and started taking singing lessons, and he was definitely taking steps to improve the sound of his voice. And so on this record, even though, again, like with the last two albums, there are only 2 songs that I love and adore on this record, and the rest are kind of forgettable and bland, the one thing that is great about this album overall that I don't think anyone, including In Flames haters, can deny is that just how much better Anders' vocals sound overall. His screams and even low growls that he throws in from time to time, which he's not actually known for doing, his screams and his low growls sound fantastic. They sound really well done, really nicely polished and done. You can tell he's brushed up on his techniques and he's put in the work. But the best element is the one track. So like I said, there are 2 tracks on Either Mask that I really love. The first is the single I Am Above, which is, of course, feels like a track from the A Sense of Purpose days. And then you've got the track In This Life, which is a very slow, ballady kind of more rock song, everything like that. That sounds like something that would play as an anime ending theme or something like that for a shonen anime. But the song In This Life is pure singing. There's no actual screaming in it, and Anders' singing voice just sounds phenomenal. Like, now that he's taken the singing lessons, and it's a really good song. Regardless of how you feel about these ballady songs, catchy or non-catchy ones. It's a great song overall, and especially with Anders' vocals as they sound now. He's never sounded so good before. He sounds better than ever, and it's a great song overall. So just for that and I Am Above alone, it stays in C tier. It doesn't go to B tier or anything like that. But it's just for the vocal performances alone, even if the rest of the songs aren't that great, just for the vocal performance alone, it belongs up in C tier and is definitely better than Battles by a long mile. So yeah, definitely because of that. Then we get to the new album, Forgone, which I haven't listened to the full album yet. I've only listened to the singles and 1 or 2 other tracks here and there. For the most part, it is a bit of a return to form. It's probably the heaviest album they've put out in over a decade since, A Sense of Purpose came out. It's, like as I said, probably the heaviest in terms of what they are able to do with their new sound. The heaviest thing they put out for a while, but, is it one of the best records ever? No, absolutely not. It's still pretty much a tolerable album by all stretches of the imagination. So again, along with all of these others, it belongs in C tier because, again, it's not quite meeting the standard that they have set for themselves in their older works. Now, again, it's not to say it's bad or a horrendous album. It's got plenty of great tracks like Meet Your Maker, of course, the self-titled Forgone. There's also the track State of Slow Decay. there's a whole bunch of these tracks on here, but just overall, it's still not quite a B tier on A tier album. I still think the band have a long way to go to if they want to recapture that magic that they had from their early days, or even from the days of A Sense of Purpose. They still got a lot of work to do to kind of bring back that magic and enhance it and everything like that. But even if this is just a once-off shot, it's a much better return to form, far better than everything from Sounds of a Playground Fading up until this point. So yeah, even though it's on C tier, it's definitely better than some of these, and definitely of course leagues better than these two albums. But yeah, I guess that is my overall ranking of In Flames' entire discography. So guys, my only question to you then is, what is your favorite In Flames album? Let me know in the comments down below. Let me know which one is your favorite, or which ones, if you want to list them all. Tell me why they are your favorites, and also please tell me how you discovered In Flames and how you got into them and what you love about them. And with that being said, guys, I am Andy Metal Viking, and until the next episode, take care of yourselves, and as always, have a kick-ass day. Cheers.